You have pointed out, True, information about UFOs and aliens oftentimes surfaces totally anonymously. The Truman document, for instance, dated 1952. It's a briefing document for Eisenhower from President Truman. It involves discussion of the Majestic 12, the Roswell crash, sightings in 1947 over Mount Rainier, and this particular document arrived in an unmarked envelope at the home of a noted UFO researcher in 1987. The pages were recorded on 8 exposures of 35mm film.
Much of the information that we receive actually comes from government employees and undercover civilian investigators. These people feed information and in many cases lead investigators to classified material recently made available through the Freedom of Information Act. Now, these undercover employees and investigators have their own reasons for not coming forward. Sometimes they fear ridicule. Sometimes they fear they'll lose their job. Sometimes they're even afraid for the safety of themselves and their families. In most cases, it appears to us, as we did our research, that it's a cry for help in solving a problem they see as being very serious.
As we compiled this and up-and-coming video reports, we were so impressed of the caliber of people actively involved in UFO research, people from high-level government service, the sciences, and the private sector.
Now, on one side of the coin, we have dedicated, resourceful investigators. On the other, government spokespersons and military personnel maintaining an ongoing effort to discredit any UFO research. Let's take a look now at 2 very credible researchers as they were interviewed by PM Magazine in Salt Lake City.
People are being used for food. The aliens are eating us. They're experimenting with us. Horrible, unspeakable experimentations.
John Lear's is an unbelievable story. He's certain that we have been invaded by an alien culture, that they are experimenting on us, and that the U.S. government knows about it. In fact, it's their most guarded, top secret. It all began on a hot July night in 1947, when, according to Lear and others, an alien craft crashed on a remote ranch near Roswell, New Mexico. Eyewitnesses, the local papers, even the first military men at the site reported a crashed UFO. Then, suddenly the top brass swarmed to the site. Witnesses were sworn to secrecy, and every speck of debris was literally vacuumed from the dusty desert floor. A new story was issued. It, said military officials, was nothing more than a crashed weather balloon. William Moore has written a book on the Roswell incident.
We know that it was not a weather balloon. The people who gave out that story have since come forth and said it was nothing more than a fabrication to get the press off their backs. The evidence suggests it was a spacecraft, and the evidence suggests the government grabbed it and carted it away and is still involved with the examination of it.
Now, just imagine that the people that are responsible for our government looking at this thing and also realizing that only 9 years earlier, in 1938, thousands of people had been panicked by the H.G. Wells presentation of War of the Worlds. And just imagine what these people thought when they were faced with the reality of the thing. It was just absolutely important, of just absolutely world-shaking, earth-shattering importance. This thing be kept secret forever and ever.
In fact, government documents unearthed via the Freedom of Information Act suggest that both craft and alien bodies had been retrieved. However, references are vague, and large portions of the text have been censored. What is known is that in 1947, the United States Air Force began a series of codenamed projects set up to monitor UFOs.
The truth of the matter is, since 1947, we have collected and have in our possession at least 30 to 35 extraterrestrial flying saucers. We have collected and have in our possession at least 100 to 150 alien bodies representing at least 3 different species that people are being abducted at an unprecedented rate.
Lear goes so far as to claim that the U.S. government has established communication with this alien power and actually collaborated with them. We have even built underground research facilities in top secret areas to house their little gray scientists.
The ones that I know for sure that exist are the ones in Nevada at Area 51. There is a underground alien base there. It's our nation's most secret operational facility, and that's where they fly the extraterrestrial craft out of.
Now, says Lear, they have run amok. They are out of control and they are not benevolent. Our government realizes it made a horrible mistake and can do nothing about it. Moore believes that it's not the aliens, but John Lear who's run amok, and he's outraged by his stories. Moore himself has spent years carefully and meticulously researching the UFO phenomena, proving he believes that UFOs exist, visit Earth regularly, and our government knows about it, and for unknown reasons is maintaining a massive cover-up. Stories like Lear's, he says, only discredit the truth.
John Lear called me up one time and was absolutely certain that he was about to be captured and eaten by aliens.
All I can say is my sources go right to the very top, and if it were not true, I would not be risking my credibility and my life to come forward with this information.
There is no doubt that Lear understands the inner workings of the U.S. intelligence community. He's the son of late aerospace pioneer Bill Lear, and for years flew covert missions over Laos for the CIA.
He has done nothing but collect the most outrageous rumor mill stories that are floating around on the grapevine.
Bill Moore is one of the most hardworking, credible people in this UFO field. He has probably done more to expose the cover-up than any other single individual.
But, says Lear, Moore may be working with the government and only exposing parts of the truth, parts aimed to mislead the truth seekers.
All of which is totally false.
Alien invaders, government agents, secret informants, hoaxes or scams. A cover-up like no other? Is this science fiction at its finest or reality beyond our wildest imaginations? Has John Lear stepped off the deep end?
It's not important that you believe this now, but to file it away for future reference in a month, a year, maybe 2 years. You look back on this when the truth finally gets out and you'll say, my gosh, the son of a gun was right.
Some startling information posed by top-level researchers. The difference being that Bill Moore, the man with the beard you saw, has admitted to participating in a government disinformation campaign to throw researchers like John Lear off the trail. And we found it kind of interesting in our research. If UFOs don't exist, then why is the government participating in disinformation about UFOs?
You might even ask, how does a man with John Lear's background and prominence become so actively involved in UFO investigations? We find out during an interview with award-winning broadcast journalist George Knapp of KLAS-TV in Las Vegas.
3 years ago, when I had a friend of mine come through Nellis Air Force Base who I had flown with in Laos. I flew for a private company over there, and he flew for the ambassador. He was a Raven. And really knew him very well. He came through here about 3 years ago, and in the process of asking him where all he had been in the past few years, he mentioned he was at Bennewitz. And Bennewitz was, of course, the site of a very famous flying saucer landing in 1980. And I said, oh, well, that's supposedly where that flying saucer landed. And he said, no, John, not supposedly, it did. I didn't see it because I was confined to quarters, but I will give you the names of the guys who did. And gave me General Gordon Williams, Colonel Chuck Halt, Major Ted Conrad. He said, if you ever see these guys, they'll tell you. And I said, you mean all this stuff is true? There are aliens and flying saucers? And he said, I hope to tell you. So that's when I set out on this thing to find out what the bottom line was. And so what I've been talking to you about over the past couple of years is what I keep finding out. And we're getting closer and closer to the truth.
Lear's not the only one formerly with the government intelligence community. Bill Cooper, a former Navy man, describes the incident that turned him onto UFO research during a subsequent interview with Knapp and Lear.
In the Navy, I had an occasion to actually see what they call a UFO, only this was certainly not unidentified. The only thing that I could tell about it that was unidentified is we didn't know who was flying it. I was on a submarine on the surface between Pearl Harbor and the Portland, Oregon, Seattle, Washington area.
What did it look like? What did you see?
It was a huge, absolutely, without a doubt, metal machine which had been built by someone somewhere, came up out of the water, tumbled end over end, and went up into the clouds. It was low cloud cover that day. There were 3 personnel on the conning tower. It was myself, the starboard lookout, and the officer of the deck. His name was Ensign Ball.
You all saw it?
Yeah, all saw it. The captain was called to the bridge. He came up, followed by the chief quartermaster, who brought a 35-millimeter camera. The craft, or another craft that looked exactly like it, came back down out of the clouds, again tumbling end over end, went into the water. And the whole thing was incredible. I was absolutely stunned. But it was obvious that it was metal, it was a machine, it did not glow like the normal accounts of...
meteors or something like that?
No, and pictures were taken. When we arrived back in port, we were debriefed by Office of Naval Intelligence officer who basically the gist of the debriefing was is you didn't see anything and you're not going to talk about anything, and if you do, you're going to be in deep trouble. So that was the end of that.
Are concerned. Only 2 presidents have had complete knowledge of the alien program, President Eisenhower and President Bush, because of his involvement with the Central Intelligence Agency.
John Lear can corroborate that statement.
The other thing is I said that President Reagan did not know what was going on, and he does to a certain extent, but the President of the United States does not have a high enough clearance to know the whole thing. And it's interesting to note that above top secret, there's 38 levels of clearances.
Now that's hard to buy, that the president, if somebody has a higher clearance than the president, he's not allowed to know. Who makes that decision?
If you think that's hard to buy, wait till you hear the rest of this stuff.
I mean, who makes that decision? Oh, sorry, we can't let Ronald Reagan know about this stuff.
It's an organization called MJ-12. It was established by President Truman by executive order in September 24th, 1947. And when Dwight D. Eisenhower was elected in 1952, he increased even the security requirements because he was military-oriented. And the military psych has a very disdain for elected officials. So he's the one that effectively let the reins of power of the executive office slip from the president into the hands of MJ-12, who runs everything now.
Our research team has amassed a mountain of documents that refer to or expressly describe UFO incidents and encounters. Jody?
Headquarters, Air Force Office of Special Investigations, September-November 1980. To whom this is addressed is deleted. It's a request for photographic interpretation by, again deleted, who provided negatives and film. The document describes trilateral insignia known to be on alien devices. Document shows tampering where NSA was changed to NASA before document was released under Freedom of Information Act. Document mentions high-frequency beam pulses and implies that Bennewitz was gaining alien data from these signals.
Now, a document we have here that's a little more colorful than most records a shooting incident reported at Ellsworth Air Force Base. Now, this is an actual official complaint report from Ellsworth. It's filled out by the guard duty officer. Helping hand is one of the code words, a security violation. Another one, covered wagon, security violation. Paul D. Heinzman, a sergeant in the U.S. Air Force Wing Security Control. The report continues. Samuel Lime, Security Control, telephone WSC, and reported an OZ alarm activation at L9. That Lime sat number 1. It's all military code, but it gets down to the incident was upgraded to a covered wagon per request of Captain Stokes. The report goes on to say that when these security officers responded to the alarm, a beam of light hit his rifle and it disintegrated, melted, burned his hands. They fired at aliens, as it says in the report, another beam of light. According to this, the 2 soldiers involved were so terrified, they called for more help.
Trying to psychologically acclimate the public before events soon to come, apparently, of force themselves on the American public and the world at large.
Journalist Linda Howe has written a book and produced a documentary film on the subject of mutilations. Let's take a look at a minute or two of what her film discovered.
In northeastern Colorado, another favorite spot for the mutilators, Tex Graves, former sheriff of Logan County, insists the 93 mutilated carcasses he investigated were not natural deaths.
The very first one we had was southwest of Sterling. When we first looked at it, it was just unbelievable that you could take an animal and do this too without leaving some kind of track, some kind of evidence behind, such as cigarette butts, matches, handprints, footprints, but there was nothing. The animal looked almost horrible, and it was something that I didn't really want to believe then. And there was, we probably had 5 or 6 others before I really did believe something strange was going on. We had one up north where we believed the animal was paralyzed and was alive when it was being mutilated. An eye and an ear, the tongue, the rectal area was taken out, but the animal dug a hole with its head, but none of the other parts of the body moved, not even the legs. 6 north of town on a very hard pasture, almost like hard brick. We found tripod marks 12 inches across. The tripod marks were 14 feet apart. We found one set that had gone in the ground roughly 8 inches. And it would take a good post hole digger or shovel to dig in like this. It indicated something very heavy had sat down in this area, yet there was no tracks leading from it nor to it. Almost nightly when this was going on, we could pick out a very brilliant, huge, brilliant light in the sky. We had a newsman take pictures of it with a very high-powered lens, but all we got out of this was the movement of it and the light showing very brilliant. Several times we observed smaller lights come out of this aircraft and then come down toward Earth. And when it would move, it could move up and down, backwards, forwards, travel very rapidly. And after a while, these smaller lights would join up with the larger one, and then they'd disappear.
Lou Gerardo is the chief investigator for the district attorney's office in Trinidad, Colorado. Extraterrestrials are the ones mutilating animals. What do you think the implications are then for this planet?
Throughout the mutilations, all of us involved have been concerned with the possibility of the mutilations going from animals to human beings, understandably. Thank God to this point it hasn't happened. Whatever they're doing with the portions of these animals they are taking, I haven't the slightest idea. There's a reason for it. It's not haphazard. There's a pattern to it. I don't know. I think it's a wait-and-see game. What else can we do? If we do have beings from outer space doing this, with the capabilities to do things like this, what can we as a human race do?
Now that is bizarre. In looking at this videotape, it's amazing. Those are surgical cuts. They're perfectly clean.
Yes, you don't see cuts like that at the butcher.
That's for sure.
Some of the interesting things about the mutilations as well, as the photos, the video describes, is that the incisions are very clean. There is no blood. It is done in an advanced surgical procedure, and one of the most interesting things is that there is blood drained completely from the animal, no sign of blood, yet there is no vascular or organ collapse from that, something we could not do in our own surgical hospitals or procedures.
I know you've done an awful lot of research and reading on this subject, and I think you've confirmed that the different procedures that were done, the vascular system doesn't collapse, there's no bleeding, the edges of the incisions are symmetrical. That we don't have the technology to do that, even if it were done surgically.
No, the instruments with the serrated edges, and it's almost as if something as if an apple were cored, it is that simple, it is that clean, and there is not a mess, there is not anything that you would really anticipate to find when you think of something being butchered.
This system the government has used for covering up this information. You would think that over the span of 40+ years, they might have tried at one time or another to bring this information to the public. John Lear has some thoughts on this subject.
Now, on April 25th, 1964, was the first official communication between our government and the aliens. 3 saucers landed there by prearranged agreement. It was filmed by 5 high-speed cameras, 68,000 feet of film. The reason we know this is because in 1972, when they were going to release the first information about UFOs to the public, a very knowledgeable writer, his name was Robert Emenegger, was asked by the agency to write a documentary, which he did. And they were going to release this thing, and we had the whole history of the UFOs, and the last part of the documentary was the footage of the saucer landing. But in 1973, when they're ready to go, we had Watergate, and they were faced with 2 problems. Number 1 is they didn't think the public could handle 2 traumatic experiences at the same time, and number 2, they thought that the public would perceive this picture of aliens and spacecraft as a ploy by Nixon to divert the attention from Watergate. So they shelved it. The documentary actually came out. It was narrated by Rod Serling, but instead of the real footage, they had drawings of these flying saucer landing, and they said, Rod Serling says, let's consider an event that could possibly happen in the future or may have already happened.
It seems almost certain that if other beings more advanced than ourselves do inhabit other sectors of the universe, then it's quite probable there will come that day, that moment in time, when official contact will be made. Let's look at an incident that might happen in the future, or perhaps could have happened already. The premise is that contact is made by extraterrestrial beings with representatives of the United States Air Force at Holloman Air Force Base in the deserts of New Mexico. The day is clear. It's about 5:32 a.m. at Holloman Air Force Base. Traffic light. One recon plane is on the field ready for takeoff when Sergeant Mann is given a report of an approaching unidentified craft.
Yeah, Bill, no, nothing on the wall.
I'll repeat it again. Unidentified approaching objects on coordinate 49er, 34 degrees southwest, while I'm reading the right.
Can I go northeast with the Army helicopter?
Probably a stray civilian, maybe. Keep me informed.
142, turn.
I see him over there. Check with Edwards. Make contact with him, Bill.
This is Holloman Air Force Base Control Tower. Identify yourself. What's your tail number? You're encroaching on military airspace. Warning, identify yourself. You're in a restricted military air corridor.
Call the base commander.
Base commander's office, Sergeant Whitmore speaking. Yes? Yes, hold on. Colonel, for you.
This is Colonel Horner, yes? Yes, an unidentified vehicle. You warned the aircraft again?
142, turn left.
What's its shape?
Radar contact.
Check Edwards. Civilian patrol? Okay, all right. Sound a red alert.
Unidentified aircraft approaching.
Hey, Bill, give me a quick check with Wright Patterson Intelligence. There may be an experimental craft from somewhere, I don't know, here. Alert the fire chief and security and safety.
Interceptors are dispatched to escort the unidentified crafts out of the area. During a routine photographic mission, a tech sergeant and staff sergeant of the base photographic team were aboard a helicopter at the time and run off several feet of film of the 3 objects, one of which breaks away and begins a descent. A second high-speed camera crew on the ground runs off approximately 600 feet. The cameras continue to roll as the extraordinary vehicle comes into view. It hovers, almost silently, about 10 feet off the ground for nearly a minute and yaws like a ship at anchor, then sets down on 3 extension pads. Commander and 2 officers, along with 2 base Air Force scientists, arrive and wait apprehensively. A panel slides open on the side of the craft. Stepping forward, 1, then 2,
and a third, what appear to be men dressed in tight-fitting jumpsuits, perhaps short by our standards, with an odd blue-gray complexion, eyes set far apart, a large pronounced nose. They wear a headpiece that resembles a rope-like design. The commander and the two scientists step forward to greet the visitors. Arrangements are made by some sort of communication, and the group quickly retires to an inner office in the King 1 area. Left behind stand a stunned group of military personnel. Who the visitors are, where they're from, and what they want is unknown.
Interesting hypothetical situation. Or is it hypothetical? As a person involved in television production most of my adult life, I have some serious questions about this Serling 1-hour program that we just saw bits of. Now, I have seen the entire show. In the very beginning of the show, there are 2 Academy Award-winning actors featured. Serling never used name talent in any of his productions. It was always a strong script with unknown talent. There also was an appearance by a Department of Defense spokesman, Rod Serling, in the Pentagon doing a UFO feature at a time when the government said UFOs didn't exist. Then, after this very well done, very expensive piece of videotape, we go to a very rushed, thrown together segment that shows you loudspeakers and microphones and clocks and telephones. The 2 pieces don't seem to fit together. It appears as if the first part of the show was done, the last part had to be thrown together in a few minutes. Makes you wonder. Now, Mr. Wilson, you have information about this particular segment on the Rod Serling program.
There's been some analysis of this particular film. It's suspected and pretty well demonstrated, as far as we can determine, that the government had a plan in process during this particular point in time to bring some very superficial information about alien presence to the minds of the American public. However, in the middle of the production, certain incidents that occurred allegedly